Good day, everyone. I am Julia Vivian O. Azares, and I am here to discuss to you the topics in Chapter 22, the substantive test of intangible assets, goodwill, and prepaid expenses. So, what is intangible asset? Before I will be tackling the audit procedures under this topic, so we will first identify, or I will just give you short explanation on what is intangible asset, what is goodwill, and what is prepaid expenses. So intangible assets are non-physical assets without a physical substance. So they include things like patents, copyrights, trademark, intellectual property, and goodwill. So these assets typically provide long-term economic benefits to the company, but they lack physical form. So non-physical assets sila, and at the same time they lack physical form and physical substance. Goodwill. So what is goodwill? So goodwill represents the excess of the purchase price of a company over the fair value of its identifiable assets and liabilities when acquired. So it arises when a company acquires another company for a price higher than the fair value of its net asset. Goodwill represents the value of company's reputation, brand, customer relationships, and other intangible factors that contributes to its worth. Prepaid expense. So what is prepaid expense? So prepaid expense are costs that have been paid in advance but have not yet been used or consumed. They represent future expenses that have been paid upfront. Common examples include prepaid services. So prepaid expenses are initially recorded as asset on the balance sheet and are gradually expensed over time as they are used or consumed. So if wala pa siya na consume or wala pa siya nagamit, ang initial record ani is ang asset. But once na they are used or consumed, imo na silang i-expensed. For this chapter, we will discuss here the audit of intangibles, its objectives and procedure, as well as the management assertion relating to intangibles. So identifiable intangibles asset, or the franchises, the patents, copyrights, trademark, which is katong gi-mention ako ganina, may be acquired singly as part of an asset or as part of an entire entity. So the entity also may generate internally an intangible asset but must comply with strict capitalization criterion of PSA 38, the intangible assets. While an identifiable intangible asset or ang katong goodwill may be recognized only in connection with a business combination, in designing the audit procedure to check the appropriateness of valuation and disclosure of intangible asset and goodwill. The auditor should consider the requirements of PSA 38 intangible asset and other relevant PFR. Okay, so when auditing the intangible asset, goodwill, and prepaid expense, we need to consider the related income statement accounts such as amortization expense, office supplies expense, insurance expense, and other items. Natin audit objectives dire. So, when auditing intangible asset, goodwill, and prepaid expense, the principal objective for the substantive test is to be determined the following. So, morning kanina sa atong table dire, natay assertion category and the account balance says audit objectives. So, natay the existence or occurrence, the completeness, the valuation and allocation, the rights and obligation, the presentation and disclosure. Okay, so we have here audit procedure. First, analyze and examine evidence of evaluation of intangibles. So, ang primary audit objectives ani is existence or occurrence, rights, accuracy, valuation and allocation, presentation and disclosure. So the auditor should obtain a schedule of intangibles, including goodwill, which shows the beginning and ending balance in addition and disposable during the current period. including diri ang write-offs if naa man gani. So, the schedule also commonly includes the nature of each asset, the date of its acquisition, its useful life, if ever applicable si Jaha, and sales proceeds of disposable and the related gain or loss. Further, before testing the basis on which additions, amortization, impairments, and disposal are recorded, the auditor shall test the summarization of the schedule and compare the totals to the appropriate balances in the statement of financial position and to the appropriate income or expense accounts. So, we have here the original cost. So, for the original cost of intangible asset, the auditor will ordinarily refer to the permanent file of the prior year working paper and roll it forward to the current year. So, ang original cost, so auditors typically determine the original cost of an intangible asset by referencing the permanent file of prior year's working papers and updating it to the current year. So, if it's an initial engagement or there is no prior audit history, if manggaling siya prior audit history, auditors may rely on previous audited financial statements, previous auditors' working papers, or any evidence supporting initial records amount. Next is the cost of addition. So, in examining the cost of intangible asset acquired during the period, the auditor ordinarily vouches supporting documents and cash paid to acquire and register an intangible asset. So, for internally generated intangible asset, the auditor should check whether the amounts capitalized is in accordance with the strict requirement of PSA 38 intangible asset. So, for internally generated intangible asset, dapat i-ensure jud sa auditor na ang amount capitalized or gi-record as an asset ni-adhere siya ngadto sa kadtong strict nga requirement sa PSA 38 intangible asset. So, this includes verifying that only qualifying costs are capitalized as per the standards guideline. Let's proceed to the disposals. So, additionally, the auditor should also test the disposals of intangibles during the year. So, in performing these tests, the audit evidence regarding the recognition is obtained, such as the appropriate authorization or the related board minutes of the transaction. So, the evidence of cash receipt is likewise obtained, as the audit objectives regarding the accuracy, and completeness of gains or losses on disposable of intangibles are tested, as well as in the procedure. Ang sa disposal, ang auditors record sila nga i-test ang disposable sa intangible asset during sa audit process. And then, ni-involve po ni siya og pag-review sa documents such as shift test, appropriate documentation, or board minutes related to the transaction. And ang auditor sad, obtain ni sila og evidences of cash receipt cash receipts para ma-ensure ang accuracy and completeness sa gains o losses sa disposals. And then, they independently recalculate gains or loss. Then, based sa katong disposable details nga na-obtain during the testing. And also, ang auditors, dapat i-review nila ang entities impairment analysis for disposable of intangibles. We'll now proceed to the impairment. So, the PAS 36 requires that an entity should review assets for impairment whenever events or changes in circumstances indicate that carrying value may not be recoverable. So, the management should provide impairment loss if the carrying amount of the asset is greater than its recoverable amount. So, therefore, in assessing the propriety of impairment, The auditor should inquire with the management their approach in identifying indicators of impairment and the actions taken as a result of any potential impairment noted. So, ang mga auditors ordinarily should perform the following procedures. So, na mga procedures na gina-follow. So, na 3 kabuok. First is evaluate the appropriateness of the valuation model and assumption used. Kaduha is assess the reasonableness of the management's estimates. And lastly, evaluate the accuracy, completeness, and the relevance of the important data on which statements or measurements are based. So let's proceed to the another audit procedure, which is verify existence and valuation of prepaid expense. So the primary audit objective of these are existence or occurrence and valuation and allocation. So in some instances, an entity might pay in advance or required to pay in advance an item that will benefit more than one accounting period. So common examples of prepaid expense are real property, tax, office supplies, rent, insurance, and others. So ordinarily, only those prepaid expense and deferred charges that are considered material are the ones subjected for examination. So in auditing prepaid expenses, the auditor should verify the existence of prepayment by examining invoices, contracts, and other supporting documents. So dapat i-verify dyan nila nga na ay nahitabo nga pagbayad, prepayment. So ilan ang kuanon is ilan ang mabuhat by examining katong mga invoices, contracts, o mga supporting documents na ilang na-collect. Next is ascertain whether the amount reported as assets will benefit the succeeding period and bears a reasonable relationship to the unexpired benefit. So example ani is if a company prepaid rent for a building for the next 12 months, the auditor will verify the lease agreement and confirm that the prepaid amount accurately reflects the portion of rent attributable to each period. So this ensures that the company's financial statement reflect the economic reality of the prepaid expense. So auditor may also examine corresponding prepayments that were recognized as expense during the current period to ensure consistency and accuracy in the treatment of prepaid expense. So this comprehensive approach helps auditors verify the existence and valuation of prepaid expense, ensuring that financial statements provide a true and fair view of the company's financial position and performance. Okay, so next is perform analytical procedure for intangible asset, goodwill, and prepaid expense. So the primary audit objectives are existence, occurrence, completeness, valuation, and allocation. So the specific trends and ratios used in judging the overall reasonableness of recorded amounts for intangible asset, goodwill, and prepaid expense will vary with the nature of the client's operation. Among the ratios and the trends of the following commonly used by the auditors for this purpose are the following. So natay ratio analysis o the trend analysis. Ratio analysis involves calculating ratios that provide insight into the relationship between different financial statement items. So, para sa intangible asset, auditors may calculate the ratio of total amortization expense to total cost of intangible asset to assess the efficiency of asset utilization. So, similarly, ang sa prepaid expense pod, auditors may calculate the ratio of total prepaid expense to total current asset to evaluate the proportion of asset tied up in prepaid expenses. So, ang next na po, ang ikaduha is ang trend analysis. So, for the trend analysis, compares figures over time to identify significant changes or anomalies. Auditors compare intangible asset, acquisition, and retirements on a monthly and yearly basis to identify any irregularities or unexpected fluctuation. So, for example is, Significant fluctuations in the level of intangible asset from month to month or year to year may warrant further investigation. So, it is important to note that the specific trends and ratios used may vary depending on the nature of the client's operation and the auditor's professional judgment. So these analytical procedures provide auditors with reliable insight into the completeness, valuation, and allocation of the recorded amounts for tangible asset, goodwill, and prepaid expenses, ultimately enhancing the reliability of the financial statements. Next is evaluate financial statement presenting and disclosures. So the primary audit objectives are presentation and disclosure. So for each class of the intangible asset, the auditor should check whether the entity has disclosed the following requirement under PAS 2038. So first is basis for ensuring carrying amount. So mo yung mga requirements sa under sa PAS 38. So, kanina mo ni ang basis for measuring carrying amount, amortization method used, useful lives or amortization rates used, gross carrying amount and accumulated amortization impairment losses at the beginning and the end of the period, reconciliation of the carrying amount at the beginning and the end of the period, the restrictions on title, and commitments to acquire intangible assets. So, goodwill represent the excess of the purchase price of a company over the fair value of its intangible net asset acquired in business combination. So, unlike other intangible asset, goodwill lacks identifiability. So, as I've mentioned, diba, ganina, nga ang goodwill is an intangible asset nga na belong sa unidentifiable. So, ang kaning goodwill nag-lack ni siya og identifiability, meaning it cannot be separated or sold independently from the acquired business. So, additionally, goodwill is considered to have an indefinite useful life, which means it is not subject to amortization, but it tested for impairments annually. So, under the provision of the PFRS, goodwill typically arises only in business combination and is usually reported in the consolidated financial statements, especially in cases stock acquisitions. Okay, so lastly, we have here the summary of the audit procedures classified for assertion. So, nadiri ang assertion category nato, which is the existence or occurrence, accuracy, completeness, valuation and allocation, rights and obligation, and lastly, the presentation disclosure. So, nandiyan corresponding primary audit procedures. So, mo nang makita ninyo sa atong table. Okay, so that's all for chapter 22.